Every now and then there comes an online multiplayer title that just defines or screams being from a particular age of gaming, or even place. A game so iconic and noticeable that even though it never had massive mainstream success, it still creates discussion and intrigue today. GunZ Duel was prime 2006 gaming, back when nerds on the internet were still emerging from the deep and dark forums from whence they came. Newgrounds, MMORPG.com, and more iconic websites of our youth all had references, whether in montages, gameplays, or shitposts of GunZ Duel. It was a rite of passage for many of us. GunZ Duel came out of nowhere when it launched in the West in 2006 from developer MAIET Entertainment out of South Korea, introducing fast-paced movement and action we hadn't ever seen. GunZ focused more on what was described as infighting, with guns. Think gunslinging but ramped up to the anime levels. It was awesome. No peeking corners endlessly or camping. You could double dash, buffered bunny hop, b-hop dash, wall run, wall cancel, animation cancel, butterfly, which was attacking and blocking at the same time, slash shot, and I'm not kidding, that's not even it. The sheer movement options and speed at which they could be executed in GunZ made for arguably one of the most fast-paced multiplayer shooters we had ever seen. But although GunZ had quite the legendary status and had existed for over 15 years at this point, and they even made a sequel, GunZ 2, which would prove to be an unfortunate massive failure by comparison, the developer who created it faded into a sort of sad obscurity during that journey, and the license behind GunZ itself has seemed shelved and traded around a few times. Now, GunZ is still playable today despite its multiple shutdowns, in more ways than one, but not to the same official capacity it once was. In order to find out why that isn't the case, we have to go back far enough to diagnose the largest contributing factors that led to either GunZ failing to catch massive popularity, or why the title was unable to have a healthier official longevity. Not all deaths are abrupt, sudden, or full of deep tragedy. Some titles just fade into obscurity. And those sorts of episodes like this one will focus more on the positive life cycle of a game, and its given legacy. So think of this as a special homage to GunZ and GunZ players, and less of a focus on what the game was bad at, because I personally like and enjoyed the game, flaws and all. But my prefacing aside, we still do have a mystery to solve, as much as a story to tell, detectives. MAIET Entertainment, which stands for Team backwards with the I thrown in there for innovation, was formed way back in 1998 in Korea, with quite the humble beginnings. It was a team of researchers who banded together to create a video game development team, which is a pretty cool origin story, I might add. MAIET would launch their first game, a semi-successful online RTS title, A Saga. Now, I played a title much like this called Artifact as a kid, so I'm quite fond of this incredibly niche genre where you can play RTS games online with other players simultaneously, over different time periods and game lengths. The title they would build themselves up to next, however, was GunZ Duel, as it was dubbed, which would first see its closed beta back in 2003 in just Korea. The official launch of GunZ Duel in Korea was sometime in the summer of 2003. There's little information due to it being an Eastern launch 20 years old at this point, but the only time you see a title brought from Korea to the Western market is if either it shares some level of success, or they put a lot of money into it and they want that investment back. With GunZ, it looked like the latter, but GunZ at this point was a mystery. And that would all change in 2005. GunZ closed beta would hit the West 2005, hitting at just about the peak rise of the internet rage and age, where memes were just funny images we posted when bored online. Well, before they were really memes, I mean. When GunZ hit the Western world, we had never seen anything like it before. Sure, fast-paced arena shooters like Quake and Halo had existed already, but GunZ brought more of a focus on infighting and gunslinging, coupled with insane movement ability. The uniqueness was apparent as soon as it was playable online. It was that distinctive of a title. This closed beta would prove successful as within the next year, November 29th, 2006, GunZ Duel would be launched in both the EU and the US, bringing to the West for the first time a fast-paced, movement-based anime shooter. GunZ was a third-person, peer-to-peer multiplayer shooter, meaning that they didn't utilize dedicated servers, so one player would serve as the server, so to say. The primary game modes that were played were Deathmatch or Team Deathmatch, and the Quest mode, a PvE-based cooperative mode where you killed monsters and eventually a boss. Let's talk about the actual gameplay, the flagship part of GunZ, the part that everybody remembers, love or hate. GunZ is a third-person shooter, but it's like no other. Infighting is a focus on the fighting that happens within your immediate peripheral. Think of close quarters combat with guns and melee weapons. The CQC aspect of GunZ combined with the, for a time, completely unique melee weapon mechanics made for incredibly fast-paced up-close and personal combat. GunZ had standard armor with bonuses that improved your survivability, showcasing gender-specific armor for many for the first time. These armor pieces included head, hand, body, hands, legs, and feet pieces. Headgear was obtained from questing or later on purchasing. You could choose between 7 different weapons: pistols, rifles, revolvers, shotguns, SMGs, MGs, and rocket launchers, and 4 melee weapons, though the last one never launched in the NA, officially: daggers, swords, dual swords, and large swords. You then had grenades, rings, and an enchant slot, and a recovery slot. You had up to 12 total equipment slots with a total weight requirement or limit, and that made sense because the whole point of GunZ was being mobile. Switching between all of your weapons and equipment while maintaining your aim and tracking on your enemy was more challenging than in most shooters because of the movement potential that players had. The base movement alone was already incredibly impressive. You could wall run, jump, double jump, change momentum directions, crouch, and roll. However, by the time that GunZ came to the West, it had already been out in Korea for some time already, and a style of play had been developing from Korea that was finding its way to the Western launch. Kstyle, as it was dubbed, was the ultimate way to play GunZ. While early on GunZ was challenging and high-skill play, Korean style brought in more APM and the ability to perform multiple inputs in quick successions through the use of animation canceling. It's not to state that Koreans invented animation canceling. They didn't. We were doing it in Halo 2, by the way. But it's to state that they mastered it and adopted it to their own style regarding such. Some people felt conflicted about the Kstyle because it was preemptively firing off mechanics versus reactively. And it was, at the end of the day, an unintended mechanic being fully utilized. One that required insanely high APM to compete against other players with. This would raise the barrier of entry for new players greatly, and change the way that the game was played strategically. To further explain what Kstyle consisted of besides just button mashing preemptively, as in the actual techniques that you used, there are a number of useful videos on YouTube that you can go watch. For example, this one by Remix is for ex-Super Smash Bros. Melee players who are quite familiar with numerous button inputs and mechanics. The basic movement options are all ramped up when you add animation canceling in, and the combining of 2 inputs together. This becomes the new basic movement, if you will. That means that the skill floor raises up tremendously. On the more advanced end, you have techniques like flash stepping, double butterflies, and it doesn't stop there. The skill ceiling for GunZ really isn't about aiming, it's about movement and reacting properly. So as expected, they pushed the limits even more with movement with things like triple dash, double flash stepping, and so on and so forth. The movement gets so crazy that when you watch montage videos, it looks like an anime character is in there killing players. And that was the magic behind GunZ. It was all about style points and feeling like a total badass. It was like CS 1.6 on steroids. For some people, Kstyle and the movement that came with it, though, elevated that, while for others, it became the moment that they knew that they couldn't compete anymore, and some players would just move on to other games. GunZ was popular, but as a niche title, there was simply nothing else like it on the market, which made it incredibly unique and polarizing at the same time. GunZ would have so much popularity that they would introduce their cash shop January 8th, 2007. This was quite revolutionary for the time because many online games didn't even have a cash shop, especially because the Western market was very new to microtransactions. But microtransactions in lobby shooters were actually a thing from Asia originally, that even in games like Battlefield Heroes, a Western game I covered on this series as well, would feature as well. The problem with such is no amount of semantics can change this either, by the way, is that it's pay to win. Literally. The only way you can get access to high-end slots is through buying them. They weren't just cosmetic and actually had values to them. This meant that GunZ, despite its incredibly high skill cap and floor, was a pay-to-win online title, which is just about probably one of the biggest twists in the story for many people. This is arguably because it's not just a Korean title, which is more familiar with such. It's more that it wasn't designed to be so high skill originally. The player base sort of manifested that on their own. MAIET Entertainment effectively accidentally created a super competitive classic, one that by many accounts they weren't monetizing very fairly, which would end up hurting the perception of the game greatly. The first and last major update that would hit GunZ the Duel would hit February 14th, 2007, dubbed the Quest Update. This update would add hard mode to the already present Quest mode, allowing players to get better rewards and an even better challenge. May 2007, and this would be the last official update that would add new sounds and voices to the game as well. At least I think Clan Wars comes before or after, I'm not quite sure, but it was added sometime post-launch. And it would greatly change the focus of most players and the game itself. Clan Wars were usually 4 versus 4, and consisted of all the same normal madness in a guns fight, except with 3 other teammates against an enemy team. Not only were the stakes high, well, relatively for the time as the game was so young that esports didn't even really exist yet, winners would get bragging rights. And on the internet back then, that was king. Kstyle did a video on guns as an esport I recommend checking out, because it accurately captures why people both loved and hated the competitive scene in that game in retrospect. The reason GunZ the Duel would see such few major updates is that developer MAIET Entertainment was following the trend of the time period, which MMOs and online multiplayer games were doing, which was kind of getting lightning-fast sequels. In many cases, these sequels were quick to fail for a number of reasons. Find out more about some of these examples like Asheron's Call and EverQuest in their respective Death of a Game videos. GunZ 2 The Second Duel, and no, I'm not kidding about the name, would begin development as early as October 2007. But GunZ choosing to transition a mere 1 year after launching in the West was going to be taken quite negatively by that audience, because although they didn't know for sure yet, like we do with the beauty of hindsight, the shifting of resources to the sequel would doom GunZ from receiving any more future content. Sure, GunZ would receive some updates, but very little in the way of new maps or new PvE content. Especially when GunZ 2 was proving to be quite the undertaking. It was utilizing a more powerful version of the original GunZ engine, dubbed RealSpace 3.0 now, and was altogether a brand new game according to MAIET Entertainment. What was most shocking or alarming about GunZ 2 was that it wasn't necessarily looking to be a spiritual successor to GunZ or the exact style that GunZ patented. Compared to GunZ 1, we are developing GunZ 2 in a direction which combines outfighting with infighting properly. According to devs, GunZ 2 would be combining both in and outfighting unlike GunZ 1. This sounds like a cool idea in theory, but the difficulty would be in execution. If they did a bad job, then you might just have another generic feeling shooter, versus the unique identity that was GunZ. The GunZ team would also discuss their desire to break up the Kstyle that dominated their game, although this is a super old translation. How I read it is that they wanted to provide some elements of the Kstyle, but not just the Kstyle is the best way or only way to play the game. While I can see why the fanbase would not be happy with such changes, I can also see the developer's perspective because ultimately, they never intended to create the game that GunZ became. So it was kind of like them trying to recapture or retake ownership of what GunZ was, and failing to do such. Worst of all, throughout this time and dedication to create an all-new GunZ experience, the game was originally set to launch in 2009, and would then be delayed to 2010, and then 2011. Delays are a natural part of project management. I should know, I used to do it. But the issue with GunZ 2 being delayed so heavily was MAIET Entertainment was trying to cash in on the success and momentum of GunZ with a sequel. Every year delayed was going to make that more difficult. Not to mention in the case of online games especially, 1 to 2 years can make a world of difference. Think about the games that came out in just 1 to 2 years before World of Warcraft, and how outdated they were made to look and feel. GunZ 1's popularity was still quite rampant at this time, however, as the game was a cult classic in many online circles. But once GunZ 2 would launch, the fate of MAIET Entertainment and GunZ 1 would certainly become apparent. The floodgates would be opened, and GunZ would live forever. In 2011, when the source code would become available for the 1.5 version of the game. This was a super crucial move in the preservation of online games period, but in the case of GunZ, this would allow other players to run servers of their own. Considering that the game is peer-to-peer, this was great news. The source code being released, however it ended up happening, means that GunZ would continue to be played for the next decade or decades. It was absolutely a huge moment for GunZ fans, and today has still led to multiple more private servers in existence. GunZ 2 would launch in Korea in 2011 as well, the same year the source code for the original game would leak. How long the game would take to be brought to the West was a serious concern for GunZ fans, especially when the game was already delayed by 2 years. By the time the West got the sequel, would they even care anymore? Plus, how successful was GunZ 2 in Korea anyway? That success would also dictate if the game would ever be brought over, or in what capacity. GunZ 1 would shift from EG platform to Aeria Games March 2012. As far as I understand it, this was more akin to an acquisition, not a shifting. EG will report a lackluster profit and the hassle of dealing with constant hackers as the reason for the switch. Hackers had plagued GunZ since the beginning, as being a peer-to-peer game made it quite easy to hack and modify. Hackers could ESP hack, see you through walls, aim lock, or just do certain things faster or quicker than you should actually be able to do. To make matters worse, because GunZ was a peer-to-peer game, this made the game incredibly ping-reliant. Anything higher than 30 ping for most players and you weren't really competitive. Peer-to-peer games suffer from this often, which makes the hitboxes of your opponents lag to an extent, which you have to account for when playing the game. This combined with a sometimes toxic elitist player mentality kept new players from joining in and greatly burnt out many current players. I was sent multiple emails concerning the GunZ community and how toxic it could be. I heard stories that, yeah, I'm probably not going to recount, but there are a bunch of bad stories about corruption and private servers being ran by, well, not so savory people. This is common in games that are kind of left to their own device, that have high skill caps, and have a bunch of hackers. Darkfall, a game that I cut my teeth on, much like GunZ, suffered from this exact problem. Aeria Games, a free-to-play online RPG publisher based out of Germany, would now be in charge of GunZ 1. And GunZ would be playable on Aeria's platform, with characters reportedly remaining from the EG server. Aeria Games running GunZ, however, was worrying for me even at the time, and still, of course, in hindsight. I've never seen Aeria motivated by anything other than porting Korean games and making money from them, long past their time in the sun. According to previous players before the switch, GunZ was in the decline, but still managing a 4,000 plus player count. Following the switch, as in the same day even, only a few hundred players would be seen online. MAIET Entertainment was a big player in the world of online RPG development now. With 2 GunZ titles now under their belt, they would create a new title, a hardcore PvE-based title dubbed RaiderZ, or RaiderZ. That would be maligned throughout its entire career, and never properly launched or supported for various reasons. RaiderZ would launch November 2012 with basically no advertisement through Perfect World Entertainment as the publisher. I got to play and see RaiderZ at PAX East and it wasn't a half bad game. It however had rather poor explanations for what kind of game it was, and it had an overall rather low presence. Now RaiderZ is deserving of its own video, so we're not going to get into too much detail about it here, but MAIET Entertainment had built a brand new MMO after launching a sequel to GunZ the same year they offloaded the game to somebody else. Seemed like they were ready to move on from GunZ to bigger and better, more ambitious titles, but with how fast they seemed to transition off of their successful title to start, how many fans of GunZ were left supporting MAIET Entertainment in the first place? And how many had moved on to playing GunZ on their own on private servers? It must be frustrating for a developer trying to make a bigger and more ambitious game to feel like people still want to play your first game. But that's how game development works sometimes, and you're better served satisfying an existing demand versus creating an all-new one, in my opinion. The original GunZ would be shut down officially, May 31st, 2013. The numbers would continue to decrease since pre-Aeria Games levels, and Aeria had seen enough. They decided to discontinue the game. But luckily there were numerous resources and websites that were already in existence at the time to where you could go read more about GunZ, how to run the server, and how to join in and play on one too. Freestyler's World is a resource, as is GunZ Duels, where you can find out how to play GunZ even in 2023. There's also a plethora of YouTube videos to go check out. So while the game would be officially shut down at this time, before it had even shut down, there were already servers up and running. GunZ wasn't going anywhere yet. The sequel to GunZ would launch a mere months after the shutdown of the original in the West. This would make it 3 years since the game had launched in Korea. By the time GunZ 2 hit the West, nobody was looking for it anymore. Whatever fans were left was just playing classic GunZ, or moved on to other titles. And when GunZ 2 came out in the West, thanks to the internet, it was already quite well known to fans that it wasn't a GunZ title for the rabid original fans. Instead, GunZ 2 was an attempt to shy away from their iconic infighting and movement-based gameplay and transition to more of what most fans would describe as a clunky generic third-person shooter, with not much to show for it. GunZ 2 would not only fail in Korea, it would fail in the West by the summer of 2015. GunZ 2 would achieve an impressive 10,000 player peak count on Steam, before in just under a few months dropping to just down to 1,000 players or so, resulting in a shift towards maintenance mode. GunZ 2 certainly greatly affected GunZ, the Duel, and its legacy going forward. GunZ, the sequel, will likely be a forgotten title. Meanwhile, GunZ 1 remains to be played today. And that we have a lesson of venturing too far outside of your own audience, in the end, satisfying none. GunZ 2 wouldn't even have a preservation effort. It would just be forgotten. GunZ 2 would fail to revive the GunZ franchise, but news would hit the web March 2016 that the original GunZ would be reportedly revived in Korea. Masongsoft would express interest in bringing the iconic classic anime shooter back. Masongsoft, who originally merged with MAIET Entertainment following GunZ 1's launch, would buy the rights to GunZ 1 and 2 in June of 2016, with the plans of bringing the title back. They would also purchase RaiderZ with the same idea. Unfortunately though, a remarkable 5 years would pass and no update from Masongsoft would be published. There was an initial movement with GunZ in Korea, like some basic updates being conducted, but now the websites were writing articles about what happened to Masongsoft, leaving their whereabouts or future plans for the GunZ franchise unknown. Masongsoft does own the rights, so if they or anyone wants to do anything in an official capacity with GunZ, they would have to square that away with them. The last update was concerning RaiderZ, and that was a resurrection. But alas, no details further. This update was as recent as December 2022. The GunZ revival project seemed to be all but put on the shelf at this point. I even heard from one of my contacts that they reached out to Masongsoft and found out that they weren't indeed doing anything. And in response, Masongsoft enacted a bunch of DMCA takedowns of GunZ content on YouTube. Truly a bizarre happens. Now before I get to my final deduction, I want to reiterate that this video was a special one. And although there's certainly failures of MAIET Entertainment, including from themselves, in their first serious title GunZ that led to the game not getting broader appeal and being shut down sooner, there is still so much positive about the game that must be stated. I'll go ahead and say it, I'd put GunZ the Duel up there with Jedi Academy as one of the best power fantasy shooter action games that you can play, where you truly feel super powerful as your skill increases in the game. The sheer amount of movement options combined with the need to constantly track your target using their movement options contributed to a fast-paced shooter really like no other. I think it's important to talk about the legacy of a title like GunZ, because although it's still played today, and fondly remembered by some, I think there is still so much to learn from it for future titles. Not to mention for some people that didn't watch this video, all they remember GunZ for was being pay-to-win and hackers. Interesting thing about GunZ for me was that super specific movement-based tech seemed to actually be highly desired in the game even when it wasn't there originally, which contradicts many popular perspectives. In fact, the second game failed due to a lack of such. Finally, much like games like Super Smash Bros. Melee and Halo 2, glitches and bugs in the case of GunZ actually contributed to the game and its skill ceiling increasing. Devs keeping those bugs and glitches in would cement those particular games I referenced, much like GunZ, as being one-of-a-kind competitive experiences, where glitches suddenly became the actual game. While there might be an argument to remove such things as they were not intended features, doing such would remove what made those particular games unique. It'd be like removing BXRing or double-shotting from Halo 2, or removing animation canceling from GunZ, or removing wave dashing or L canceling from Super Smash Bros. Melee. GunZ the Duel is still playable today, so you have the chance to go experience what I'm discussing here, as words don't really do it justice. Just a fair warning though, some of the players can be dicks to new players, so try to find a community of players to join up with. And if not, watch a few frag videos and just be amazed. That music means that this mystery has come to an end, and unlike most cases, GunZ the Duel has been long gone. And this was more of a trip down memory lane for many of us nostalgic gamers, or a case study for those who missed out on it the first time. We've gathered enough clues and progressed the timeline detectives, which means that it's time for the final deduction. Developer had shifted their focus multiple times. Rampant hacking. The original developer perished. A failed sequel hastened the original's downfall. The Aeria Games acquisition. A niche title. Age waits for nobody. GunZ will remain in the history books as one of the most unique online shooters to come from Korea, or really anywhere. And one of my favorite games to see make the rounds, as it really is, as I've been saying over and over again, if you didn't start the drinking game, you're late. One of a kind. Unlike some retrospective episodes, however, which are not really about failures, we were able to determine that MAIET Entertainment did make some mistakes in their handling of GunZ. Which makes you think, even with all of that, GunZ still was able to have the reputation and legacy that it had? What would have been the true full potential of the game? We won't know, but what we do know is how GunZ ended up, and can still, luckily, go enjoy that experience right now to an extent. Thanks for watching.